Well, greetings and salutations, everyone, and welcome back to today's bonus. Before we jump into it, a couple links. As you know, I rely on Patreon, PayPal, and the merch to help the channel to continue to grow and go. Links to Patreon and PayPal are in the description below. Merch displayed directly under the video. Also, Dogman Frightening Encounters, Volume 1 through 3, the audiobook versions. They all were written and researched by Tom Lyons, narrated and produced by me, Jeff Nadolny. Those audiobooks are available on Audible, Amazon, and iTunes, the links to which are also in the description as well. And finally, last but definitely not least, if you'd really like to help support this channel to continue to grow and go, simply subscribe. It does not cost you a cent. Click that like button. It takes half a second. If you don't want to miss out on any of the informative uploads I put out daily, click that bell icon. And folks, please leave a comment. Why? Well, because all these things, they really do help this channel to continue to grow and go, and they definitely do matter. Now, everyone, I have taken far too much of your time. Let's jump into tonight's bonus, shall we? Today's first encounter. This happened about 10 years ago when I lived in Limestone, a small town in Maine. For reference, I lived in a small apartment complex completely surrounded by forest. It was very quiet, and lots of wildlife roamed the fields and forests surrounding the complex. I was 8 years old, lying on the top bunk of my bed, looking out my window. There was a spider that would build its web right outside of my window, so I would always watch it build its web at night before I went to sleep. My window overlooked a parking lot that was right next to the field, bordering a thick forest. One night, as I was watching the spider build its web, as I always did, I saw a very tall, ape-like thing with a long, thick tail that tapered at the end. Kind of how you'd imagine a T-Rex tail, except hairy, if that's a good comparison, walking across the parking lot. I kept watching it wander into the field just before the forest. It then placed itself between two trees, about arm's length away from each other, and began climbing up by grabbing the two opposite trees with their respective hands and feet and slowly shimming up the tree. As it made it to the tops of the tree, it sort of blended in with them and stopped moving. I couldn't see it anymore. To this day, I am completely stumped as to what I saw from my apartment window. This happened while I was living in Maliseet region of Maine. If anyone is familiar with Maliseet mythology, please comment. I was wide awake. I pinched myself very hard a couple of times just to see if I could snap myself out of it. But it was definitely real. Today's second encounter. My friends were stalked by a werewolf dogman creature in Lake Pisgah, Oregon. I'll start off by saying no, this is not my story, but it was such a crazy encounter that I have since asked each of my friends through the years to recount the events. This happened around the year 2000. About the year after this took place, I started dating one of these friends, and that's when I heard about this dog-like creature. I have since asked each friend over the years, miles apart, and they all remember the same encounter. Before my ex was even my best friend. Let's just call him Jay. He and our other friends were 17 or 18 years old at the time. I remember it began an adventure to find a place to smoke. Let's go hike to and puff. The good old days. When we got away from the parents and planned a day around smoking, it was Jay and his best friend B and their girlfriends, S and M. The four of them decided to drive to Lake Pisgah, a beautiful wooded area in Eugene, Oregon. It's more of a hill, but it's nature in its prime for sure. I've been out there many times growing up, and I know exactly what trail they were on. The main one that connects to the parking lot to the river. They had driven in B's little white sedan, parked in the parking lot, and then walked to the river. On the way to the river from the lot, there is a very small bridge that crosses a small creek, relevant later. The group spent the day out there swimming and puffing and swimming, just being typical teens. I can imagine the hunger was driving them crazy and them wanting to go home a few hours as the sun began to set. Either activity alone is bound to get someone hungry, let alone both. So they walked along a well-worn Maine path into the parking lot. This path has since been paved according to Google Maps. It doesn't take but 20 minutes or so for them to get back to the little footbridge by the parking lot that they had just crossed when hiking in. When they reached the small footbridge near the parking lot, Bee looked out toward the vast field behind them and the wooded mountain and noticed a huge dog near the tree line, about 100 yards away. They all later described it as the biggest dog they had ever seen. The dog was just sitting there, not looking scary, just looking like a humongous friendly dog. It was starting to get dark, but from M's and J's description, and the drawing she later gave me, it was a very shaggy and furry. I may even still have the notebook where she drew the thing. If I find it, I'll share that. My friends continued to walk across the small wooden bridge, and one of the girls screamed. The big dog was now on its hind legs, standing much closer than when they had seen it a couple of seconds earlier. It had traversed most of the large field in seconds it took them to get across the footbridge, which is about 10 feet. Whatever this thing was, it was fast, quiet, and stealthful. My 4 friends ran to the car, and they had the classic cliche, can't get the key in, because B was fumbling madly with the keys. At this point, the dog was standing on its hind legs at the very edge of the parking lot, looking at them still. Still had the dog face, still had the dog body, but standing up. They never saw it walk, on all fours or just 2. It was like every time they looked up, it was standing there closer. As Jay had said, every time he looked up, he was closer but not moving. All of them recounted how surreal it was to see the dog standing on its hind legs. I don't know if it ran for a few ticks and then stood up again at intervals in the field, but that's the way they describe it. Many times I've asked them, are you sure it wasn't a bear? No, it definitely was a dog standing on its hind legs. A big dog that was stalking them. Also, this is in Lane County, Oregon, in the year 2000. There are few, if any, bears out there. It would be odd, but then again, I wasn't there. The kids got into the car and sped off, leaving Pisca Dog to its own business. I've never had a reason to doubt any of their stories. In fact, S doesn't like to talk about the incident at all, because it's still too creepy for her to recall. Today's third encounter. This encounter is a very personal one and a very long one, so I appreciate your time hearing it. Just to be clear, the story you are going to hear is 100% real. It happened to me, and I remember it like it was yesterday, but it was actually 25 years ago. I was born July 14th, 1958, so at the time of this, I was 33, because it happened on August 28th. My dad would always take me and my brother Jeremiah hunting, so that custom stayed with me forever. That day, August 28th, 1991, I was hunting in Jackson Demonstration State Forest in Montecito County, California, with my brother Jeremiah. It was a little bit difficult to pattern the deer because of the water. The area is extremely thick with lots of young growth. 2 hours had passed and we only had 4 rabbits in our hunt. So we started to think about getting out of there, but we stayed for 1 more hour, just to make it worth our while. When we finally agreed that it was time to go, we heard something coming from behind us. It was a loud scream, and not a human scream, an animal scream. But it wasn't any animal we've ever heard before, so we decided to go back and look for the source of those screams. As we approached the site, we noticed that there was nothing there. We started to search the area, but as we were doing that, I felt the presence of someone, and I instantly felt observed. I turned around looking for someone or something, and I found something in the distance, hiding behind some trees. I didn't call my brother, as I felt it was nothing important. But when I almost reached the trees, I saw a heavy, hairy arm running across. I grabbed my rifle and followed the footprints left behind by the hairy man. After some 3 minutes of following, I finally caught up to the thing that left those enormous footprints. He was like 30 feet away from me. I hid as best as I could, and he didn't see me, but he certainly heard me because he looked around and started making some weird noises, as if he was trying to communicate. I wasn't sure if I should step away from my hiding spot and make contact with this beast, but I finally decided to do. I stood up and pointed my rifle toward him, slowly approaching until I was about 15 feet away. Looking at him, I noticed he was 8 to 9 feet tall. He had reddish hair and was covering him almost completely. Just part of his face and hands had no hair. I also noticed that he had some white hairs on his torso. He just looked at me and stood there making weird noises, but suddenly he mouthed a word. No danger. Very slowly, almost unintelligible, and pointed at himself. At this point in time, I lowered my rifle and kept looking at him. The nervous expression on his face had disappeared, and he started walking deep into the forest. I turned around and started looking for my brother, still shocked. When I found him, he was very worried. I told him what had happened, and he told me that he saw one also, a female with 2 babies in her hands. I'm not sure, but it's very possible that Sasquatch I found was the male one of the one my brother found, and the little squatch was their blood. When we were getting our way back to the road, I looked back and I swear I saw him in the distance observing us leaving. We never talked about this to anyone, but my brother contacted me recently with another story of a Sasquatch that I may share sometime. And because of that and this story, I became very intrigued about the subject. So I thought I'd share this story with you guys. Here are some things about the Sasquatch I encountered that I remember. He had reddish hair and white hairs in his torso. He had a deep voice, but was capable of screaming very high. His footprints were like 18 inches long and 9 to 10 inches wide. He also had very large hands, but looked very similar to humans, just more hairy. He had hair on his face that formed some kind of beard, and he also had some hair on his forehead, but his skin was more or less light-colored. Wide nose, wide lips. He looked like a hybrid human ape, almost like a Homo erectus or a Neanderthal. He looked very muscular. He couldn't stand completely straight long. He had somewhat clumsy way of walking, but he certainly could run pretty fast. He had some kind of language that was reminiscent of human language. He knew some words of English language. He was a peaceful being. Thank you for your time, and I hope you find this story interesting. I assure you it is 100% real. Today's 4th encounter. Last year I was living in a small mountain town in central southern Colorado in the Rio Grande National Forest. Super small town. Ute natives were tragically killed in the whole area of town. I don't usually get creepy vibes when I'm there, but it's definitely weird in many ways. I'm in my car at 2 in the morning with a friend. We had parked outside of our house looking down the road with only the street light across the street lighting up the area. From 15 yards in front of us, we see this large animal emerge from the darkness and catch the light. We started asking each other what it was and why it was so big. It was like the size of a small horse or a big deer. It was walking towards us and stands 1 yard away from my door. We're frozen, unable to move while we stare at it so close to us. And I say, "Is that a wolf?" It's all I could think it could be. Tall, completely silver, looking like a wolf from the movies. As it stands so close to us, it looks up to the sky to the left and then to the right. Then it runs away towards the large cliffs at the back of the town, where the abandoned mines are, and at the large forest that begins there. We were stunned, stayed frozen in silence for minutes, until we started laughing. Eventually calmed down and went inside, still confused. After that, I told some coworkers how cool it was that we saw a wolf. They all said, "That's impossible. No wolves have lived here for decades." So I researched, and they're right. No wolves have been here for like 40 years. And it would be a miracle if I had seen one, especially a gray wolf. As I look more at pictures of wolves, my memory becomes clear. What I saw was too tall and too silver to be a gray wolf. My friend and I have not forgotten one detail of this theory or story. I am sure it was not a dog. If it was, it's the biggest dog in existence. I remember the world washing away as I stared at this shining fur. It was the most majestic animal I've ever seen. There were chills covering my body, and I could barely breathe. Today's final encounter. I was standing outside of my home smoking a cigarette in Maryville, Missouri at approximately 3 in the morning, August 2010. The streetlights cast a yellow glow over my neighborhood. The air was crisp from the recent rain. As I stood near the back door, I noticed something moved in my yard. Out of my periphery, I saw what was a dog, a really big dog. But when I looked at it straight on, I was scared. The dog was as long as a horse. It loped across the lawn, and I got a good look at it. The dog thing was tan, its tail long and bushy with a white tip. Its eyes glowed green. It stopped next to the neighbor's fence, staring at me the entire time with those green glowing eyes. It stared at me until I finished my cigarette and went inside. About 5 minutes, just long enough to smoke a cigarette. I was a little freaked out. The dog slunk off between 2 houses when I went in. I took his father outside to look for tracks the next day, but we found nothing. However, when I stood where the dog stopped at the fence, my heart jumped. The dog could have stood at the middle of my chest, and I'm 6'2". That wasn't the last time I saw this dog-like creature. Dad calls it the wolf boy. We joke around about it being a werewolf. A few weeks later, I parked my car on the street behind the house after work. At around 3 in the morning, I sat inside of my car, smoking cigarettes, when I saw eyes staring at me through the darkness. The streetlight back there flickers. I was sitting in the car smoking a cigarette when I saw those green eyes. When the streetlight flickered on, he was the wolf boy. I thought my eyes were playing tricks on me because of the green glow. But it was the dog-like creature. It was lying down, just staring at me. Each time the streetlight flickered, the wolf boy inched closer. It was freaky, as close as a dog was when the light was flickering back on. I needed to go inside, so I just ran. Alright folks, just a quick little bonus to get your day going by a little smoother. Boy, it's another hot one in upstate New York. 91 degrees. I hope you guys are staying cool if it is hot where you guys are located. I know a few of you have actually enjoying fall weather. Subscriber Pup7 actually said out in Utah it was nice and chilly. Man, I cannot wait till fall. Anyway, guys, thank you for supporting this channel. Your support is what makes this channel so special and what makes it continue to grow and go. Please stay safe, happy, healthy, and ever vigilant. God bless you all.